And we are back with another edition of the Quick Bricks NBA DFS podcast, brought to you by the good guys over at Fantasy Degens. As always, I will be your host, Sean Mitchell, at smitchell17 on the Twitter machine. If you would like to follow, converse, chat, whatever. Hopefully everybody made off with some cash last night. It was a nice little 7-game slate. We've had a 6, a 7, and then tonight we get a 10-gamer. So nice little so far 3-day with all the decent sized slates. Now we get a nice bigger slate. There's some pretty good games on this one. Obviously, a lot of teams are on back-to-back, so obviously some stuff to monitor, but there's really not a lot of huge spreads, and there's some decent totals. So let's go ahead and run them down. We have the Bucks at the Pistons. We have the Pistons here on a back-to-back. We have Milwaukee minus 6.5 on the road. Only 6.5 against the Pistons on a back-to-back. It's pretty interesting. There's no total on this one. Obviously, waiting to see if Brook Lopez is going to play. Waiting to see if Detroit decides to rest anybody. Blake Griffin maybe. I know Andre Drummond played 33 minutes last night, so that one will be something we need to monitor to see if the Pistons end up sitting anyone. As far as the last 5 games in terms of pace, Milwaukee is 9th, Detroit is 30th. So, again, massive pace-up spot here for the Pistons. We know Milwaukee loves to run with pace, so that one's interesting. Game number 2, we have the Suns at the Magic. The Magic here are also on a back-to-back. Phoenix minus 1.5, 215 on the total. Phoenix 14th over the last 5 in terms of pace. Orlando 19th. Warriors at the Hornets. Charlotte minus 4.5 here at home against the Warriors. 208 total, really low total. Golden State 26th, Charlotte 29th. Not a very high-paced, fast game there. Nets at the Hawks, no spread, no total. Waiting to see. Obviously, a few people in that game they're wanting to see if it's going to play or not. Brooklyn 20th, Atlanta 7th. Of course, nice. Brooklyn usually is a team that was running with a lot of pace earlier on in the season. Not really sure what happened. I'm guessing it was probably the majority would be Kyrie. He is a faster-paced point guard. So they've kind of slipped a little bit since he's been out. Nonetheless, it's still a decent spot here. Atlanta, of course, has been in the top 5 over the last 10 or so games, so still a nice pace-up spot here. Good game to target. Heat at the Celtics. Heat are on a back-to-back. We have Boston here as a 6.5-point favorite at home, 213 on the total. Miami 17th over their last 5 in terms of pace. Boston 24th. So not exactly a nice pace-up spot here. Heat on a back-to-back. And you got almost a 7-point favorite here for Boston, who's rested at home. Grizzlies at the Bulls. Chicago minus 6.5, no total. Obviously waiting to see if Jonas Valanciunas is going to play. It looks like Morant will probably not play again. He's got some back issues that he's kind of working with. He's day-to-day. We'll kind of monitor his status. So that's one we obviously have to look for. No total on that one, but that one should be a good game. Both teams running with a lot of pace lately. The Grizz have been in the top 10 for all season. Chicago made their way into the top 5 and then kind of fell back, but they're still in the middle of the pack there in terms of pace. So that'll be a good game. We know both teams are not exactly the greatest defensively, so that one's a good one to target. Be a good game stack. Pacers at the Thunder. OKC minus 1.5 here on the road, at home. 212 on the total. Indiana 13th, OKC 11th. So you got 2 teams here who kind of sitting right here outside of the top 10 in terms of pace. This is a good game to target, and I don't think a lot of people are going to be on it. A lot of Pacers, a few Pacers that I like quite a bit, and there's a couple Thunder. So that one's interesting. T-Wolves at the Mavs, back-to-back for the Mavericks here. Dallas minus 4.5 here at home, 231 on the total, highest on the board by far. We know the Wolves are fast. They've run at the 6th highest pace over their last 5, been in the top 7 or so all season. And then the Mavericks are 4th. They've come with some pace here lately. Yesterday, I think they were 5th or 6th or something like that going into last night's game. And then tonight, yeah, of course, now they're 4th. That's really good, obviously, especially for this game that we're going to see some crazy pace in, hopefully. 231 in the total, so yeah, it's justified. Lakers on a back-to-back against the Jazz going into Utah. Utah minus 2.5, 210 on the total. Lakers 11th over their last 5 in terms of pace. Utah 8th. Interesting total on that one for 2 teams that have been running with decent pace here lately. So that's an interesting game that I think, for some reason, I think we're going to see a 3% own LeBron tonight with Luka and Young above him in the point guard list. I'll talk about that here in a minute, though. And then finally, your late night hammer with the Kings at the Trailblazers. Portland minus 2.5, 218 on the total. Sacramento running with the 28th pace. Over their last 5, Portland 14th. Portland is a typically faster team. They're playing back at home. And that one, obviously, you will want to have a little bit of exposure to. So, that's a little bit of rundown on the games. Now we'll go ahead and hop right into the positionals. Point guard, Luka Doncic, 11.5. Of course, put up 65 last night. The guy just continues to be a beast, continues to crush. Had kind of an off game the game before, of course, when everybody loaded up on him. He was uber chalk and kind of let us down with like a 44-point game. Nonetheless, gets a great matchup here tonight. We've been targeting Minnesota in the point guard spot for I don't know how long. They're not good against it. Jeff Teague is not a good defender. If they decide to put somebody like Rocco on him, Robert Covington, it doesn't really matter. Luka Doncic is just that good. So Minnesota allowing the second most fantasy points to that point guard spot over the last 5. Next, we have Trae Young here at 10-4. Played. He had a bit of a dud last game. Everybody was high on him against Golden State. Golden State giving up a lot of fantasy points to the point guard spot. It kind of let us down, only put up 33. But this is a nice bounce-back spot for him. He's only 10.4. He's put up 45, 50, 57, and 64.5 in his last 3 at home, other than that Golden State game last game. He's still averaging right around a 33.3% usage rate at home in his last 5. So I'm not worried about Trae Young here. Actually, I really like the spot. I think this game is going to be faster than most think, and I think it's going to be a good game to play. Obviously, like I said, getting the Nets at home. We know Dinwiddie isn't exactly known for his defense. So Trae Young, I really like in this game. Of course, and then you have LBJ right down below both of these guys at 10K flat. Of course, it is a back-to-back. But I do think we're going to see low ownership on him here. Of course, going into Utah, everybody has that mindset that Utah is such a gritty defensive grind down team, but they're not. They're totally different this year. They've been giving up decent amounts of points. And like I said, they've both been running with right outside the top 10, LA Lakers at 11th, Utah at 8th. This game might be faster than we think. Mike Conley has not been the defender this year that he has been, that we've known him to be when he was in Memphis. I don't think that anybody in Utah can guard LeBron James. So, with that being said, I think LBJ is probably the spot that you want to go to tonight. I think you're going to play him in tournaments. I think he's going to get low ownership, and I think he's going to crush. So, 30.9% road usage in his last 5 games, 46, 55, 64.3, and 57.8 in his last 4 on the road. So, over 46 fantasy points in all of his last 4 road games. A couple 55-pointers in there, 64-pointer. So he's got the upside. We know that this game should have decent game flow. Both of these teams running pretty decent. So LBJ, one you might want to look at, especially for tournaments. Dinwiddie at 8.2. Of course, Atlanta versus the guards, going right back to it. 28 or more minutes since he started, getting the spot starts for Kyrie. 38-plus on his last 3 on the road. Spencer Dinwiddie continues to get it done. His price is finally justified. He's a little bit over 8K, as he should have been this whole time. But his price actually finally raised a little bit. Damian Lillard at 8-1. Get a nice little price reduction here on Dame Lillard at home against Sacramento, who's allowing the 9th most fantasy points to that point guard spot over the last 5. Right around 28% usage in his last 5 at home. Carmelo coming in kind of took a little bit of his usage. He's kind of seen a drop. But he's really been right around that usage rate, even when it was just him and CJ garnering that much. I think CJ is the one that actually has been hurt the most over the Carmelo coming on. Carmelo's seeing right around 22% usage since he's began to start. I just really like the spot here for Damian Lillard tonight against Sacramento at home, of course. They've been giving up fantasy points to the point guard spot all year long. And we could see that late night hammer go off here with Damian Lillard at 8.1K. So totally fine with that. 39-44 in his last 2 at home. So he's fine. I'm not worried about it. I like the price. Malcolm Brogdon at 7.7. 39.5 and 43 fantasy points in his last 2 on the road. We know OKC is not that great against point guards. He dominated this matchup in their first game. It was a blowout because I was all over Brogdon, and he had 31 fantasy points in the first half. They ended up going on to blow him out, and he only played like 3 or 4 minutes in the second half. Really pissed everybody off because he was my roster monster that night, and he just absolutely dominated them. Chris Paul is not that good defensively. He cannot match up with Malcolm Brogdon, so you get Malcolm Brogdon here, who's played 30-plus minutes in his last 5 of 7 at 7.7K. So great spot for Brogdon once again here on the road. Terry Rozier at 6.5K. Golden State allowing the third most fantasy points to that point guard spot over their last 5. He has a smidge over 22% at 22.1% usage over his last 5 at home. He's averaging right under 31 fantasy points at home as well on the season at 30.8. Terry Rozier got a nice. His price hasn't really moved. He's been playing really well lately, and he gets a good spot here at home against Golden State. I'm 100% sure that Draymond is not going to guard him. It'll likely be like Alec Burks or something like that. So, Terry Rozier, I'm totally fine with at home here at 6.5K. I think he's at a great price. Markelle Fultz at 5.7. Phoenix, number 1 versus the point guard spot, allowing the most fantasy points to the point guard spot over the last 5 games. He has now went for over 30 fantasy points in his last 4 of 6, 27 or more in his last 3 at home. But, I'm not going to sit here and say that I think that he's a great tournament play. I think he's more cash worthy. He's just playing decent amounts of minutes. He's getting decent usage, and he's putting up decent numbers. Kind of coming into his own a little bit here lately. He's playing well. I'm not going to say that, but he's not going to be that upside usage type point guard that you're going to need for tournaments. So he's fine in cash. I think he's been playing great, and he gets a nice pace-up spot here against Phoenix tonight. Satoransky at 5.2 has been interesting here lately. Over 30 minutes in his last 3. We know Memphis struggles against the point guard spot. It'll likely be Tyus Jones again starting tonight. Looks like I said, Morant is dealing with some back issues. He probably will not play. Of course, this is going to be a nice pace-up spot either way. 30 or more fantasy points in his last 3 of 5. Thomas Satoransky has been playing well. Nobody's going to look at him. He's a great tournament play, and I will probably be on him. DeAnthony Melton, of course, playing behind Tyus Jones. He was the pivot last time. Now we've seen his price go from 3.4 to 4.6. I still think I'm fine with that. Back-to-back 30-plus fantasy point games. Gets a nice spot here against the Bulls, of course. 21% usage rate in his last 2. And like I said, it's a nice pace-up spot, pace-up game. I'm totally fine with DeAnthony Melton once again. Shooting guard, going right back to that Bulls and Memphis game with Zach LaVine at 8K. 38 or more fantasy points in his last 4 of 5 at home. 29.5% usage in his last 5. 31% usage in his last 5 games total. That 29.5 was at home in his last 5 games, And, of course, Memphis allowing the 5th most fantasy points over their last 5 games to that shooting guard spot. Zach LaVine has been playing really well. He's been getting lots and lots of usage. And he's closing out games. So Zach LaVine at 8K, I'm totally fine with. Andrew Wiggins at 7.8 has now put up 39 or more in his last 3, put up 44 and 41 in the other 2. So he's put up 39, 44, 41 in his last 3. He leads the team in usage over their last 5 games at 29.5%. So Andrew Wiggins here is in a decent spot as well against the Mavericks, who haven't exactly guarded the guard spots well. He is on the road here, but I'm totally fine with it. It's a nice pace-up spot. Should be crazy pace in that game. Highest total on the board. Andrew Wiggins at 7.8 I'm totally fine with. Devontae Graham at 7.7K, 36, 49.8, and 39.5 in his last 3 at home. He's garnering right around a 25.2% usage rate in his last 5 at home. He is put up 31.5 in his last road game, averaging 41.5 fantasy points at home. So that's really interesting. He's averaging – oh, no, that's what it was. Sorry. I messed that up. I totally jobbed that up. He's averaging 41.5 fantasy points at home. He's only averaging 31.5 on the road. So you get a 10-point split difference here from Devontae Graham from playing on the road compared to playing at home. Tonight, he's playing at home. He has a good matchup. So I think I'm totally fine. He gets the Warriors, of course, at home, who don't play a lot of defense. Totally fine with Devontae Graham at 7.7. The guy's been playing absolutely great lately. So he's fine. Buddy Hield at 7.4 in that late night hammer against Portland. Portland, we know, is struggled against the shooting guard spot. Buddy Hield, fresh off a couple 41-point fantasy games, back-to-backs. Buddy Hield, Portland allowing 6th most fantasy points to that shooting guard spot over the last 5. He's going to continue to get lots of usage, take lots of shots. So Buddy Hield, I'm totally fine with at 7-4. Jimmy Butler, I hope some of you guys jumped on him last night whenever, I said, hey, just play Jimmy Butler. He's the only Miami guard that I want. He was 7.7 last night. He's 7.3 tonight on a back-to-back. I'm assuming because it's in Boston and there's a decent, it's a 6.5 point road dog here for the Heat. But Jimmy Butler put up 62 last night against Toronto. He's going into Boston, who's allowing the number 1 fantasy points over the last 5 games to the shooting guard spot. Looks like Marcus Smart is looking to sit once again. He's dealing with some injury issues. So, yeah, Jimmy Butler. If there's no Marcus Smart, they don't really have anybody who can guard him. So Jimmy Butler at 7-3, I think, is a very, very nice, very generous price. So totally fine with that. Donovan Mitchell at 7.1 against the Lakers, where he put up 42.1 last game against the same Lakers team in L.A. Now he gets them at home. Gets a nice little, pace game here. It's a nice game. Utah minus 2.5 at home. It's a close spread. It's 210 on the total. Think that'll go over that one. He's averaging 40.4 fantasy points in his home games on the season. He's averaging 32.1% usage at home as well. He's only 7.1K. Give me Donovan Mitchell, please. Evan Fournier at 6.5 on a back-to-back. Phoenix, pace up spot here. 41, 36, 40, and 41 in his last 4. Again, Fournier continues to play well. The guy's getting decent he's getting decent usage at home. And, of course, like I said, back at home tonight, playing against Phoenix, who we know is not exactly known for their guard defensive play. So Fournier is in play again at 6.5. Alec Burks at 6K, over 31 minutes in his last 6. Charlotte struggling against that shooting guard spot, allowing the 3rd most fantasy points over the last 5 games to that shooting guard spot. He is averaging 27.6 fantasy points on the road over his last 5. With Draymond back, I think that opens him back up to being a scoring guard, like off the ball. Last game, he moved to the point guard spot. It kind of messed him up. He was the main ball handler where he had to do all the facilitating too. I think with Draymond back, that's going to actually help Burks more than it hurt him. I know we've seen some games where he's put up over 40 without Draymond, and that was a big reason why I used him last game. But I think this one's going to help him out a little bit. So Burks at 6K, I think I'm totally fine with that one. Of course, against the Hornets, who are allowing a lot of fantasy points to that shooting guard spot, moving him back to the 2 instead of playing the point. Dylan Brooks at 5.7. If Morant sits again, he's been garnering a lot of usage since. 27.1% usage in his last 2 games. 33.3 and 34.5 fantasy points in those 2 as well. Gets a nice spot here against the Bulls. I don't think you can overlook Dylan Brooks at 5.7. It's a good spot. Joe Harris, probably one of my favorite plays tonight as far as price goes. Atlanta has been getting torched by small forwards all season long. They were actually the number 1 allowing fantasy point to the small forward spot for like a week. Now they are 7th most to the shooting guard and the small forward spot. They hemorrhage points to those spots. Joe Harris has played 27 or more minutes in all but 1 game this whole season, and he's put up over 32 fantasy points in his last 5 of 6 games. He's been balling out. Without Kyrie, of course, he's had to step in and be one of the leaders on this team as well with Dinwiddie. Really like Joe Harris tonight at 5.7. Moving over to small forward, John Isaac at 6'8", over 33 minutes in his last 2. He's averaging 28 fantasy points at home, and he gets a pace-up spot here, of course, with Phoenix. So they are on a back-to-back. His price is up there at 6.8, but, with no Vucevic, Aaron Gordon is back, but, of course, they're still kind of hurting. He's still getting a lot of usage. So John Isaac is totally fine, especially against Phoenix, who we know is not – they're good, but, this is a road game for them. And I don't mind John Isaac. Eric Paschal at 6.5. It looks like he moved back to the 3 with Kevon Looney returning, playing the 4 and starting at the 4. I'm pretty interested to see who gets the boot tonight because if Kevon starts, I'm guessing who's gonna get the bump at point guard. I guess Burks moves back to the 2. And then, of course, you're going to have Alec Burks at the 2. You're going to have Paschal at the 3, Kevon at the 4, and Willie Cauley-Stein at the 5, and then Draymond at the 1. So that's my projected lineup for Golden State tonight. Paschal at 6.5 put up 43.8 fantasy points last game against no other than Atlanta. Of course, like I said, Atlanta is not very good against that small forward spot. That's why I really like Joe Harris. So Eric Paschal I'm fine with tonight. Of course, he gets a good spot. Hopefully he will start. He's been seeing 30-plus minutes in most games, so I'm totally fine with that. Chris Middleton at 6.1. I know it's hard to pay $6K for a guy that's only playing 18 minutes, but he's put up 24 or more fantasy points in his last 4. He just put up 32.3 in 8 minutes last game. It's hard. I mean, I don't think I'll be able to pay for it. I just wanted to mention him. Taurean Prince at 5'8", over 33 fantasy points in his last 3 of 5, over 30 minutes in his last 4 of 6 games. Again, we know Atlanta is allowing lots of fantasy points to the 2, 3, and 4 positions, so Taurean Prince will absolutely be in play in that game stack as well. TJ Warren at 5.5. He's averaging 28.5 fantasy points on the road for this season. OKC allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the small forward spot over the last 5 games. TJ Warren, I believe, will garner exactly zero ownership, and I think he's a good tournament play. Justice Winslow was 4.9 yesterday, played 35 minutes, put up 36.8 fantasy points. He was on my pod. I said this was a good spot, even though he hadn't put up over 20 fantasy points. And, of course, gets another good spot here against Boston, who, like I said, is hurting without Marcus Smart. I believe Justice will play over 30 minutes once again at 5.3. You're getting another bargain. So, Justice Winslow, absolutely. Excuse me. Solomon Hill at 4.7. Of course, Grizzlies with their injuries. Kyle Anderson still being out. Jonas Valanciunas if he happens to sit again. Solomon could see some solid minutes. Not no pun intended. 26 and 33 minutes in his last 2. He put up 39.5 and 21.8 in those last 2. Also, I believe this is a revenge spot for Solomon. He did play for Indiana for a short period of time. So, if that happens to roll in that situation, best case scenario, he could see 30-something minutes. So, keep an eye on that one. Moving over to the power forward, don't have to really talk about Giannis, of course, against Detroit on a back-to-back at 11-8. Hopefully he could be able to play all game. We saw Detroit blow out Cleveland last night. They're kind of riding a high. I kind of like the spot here for Giannis. You get him under 12K, 11.8 in a good spot. Detroit has not been that great against the power forward or the center spot this year, so I'm totally fine with Giannis tonight. AD against Utah, allowing the number 1 most fantasy points to the power forward spot over the last 5. He's averaging a smidge over 50 fantasy points on the road for the season at 50.3. Don't really have to talk too much about AD. I know last night he didn't do that well, neither did LeBron. I'm going to look for some bounce-back games tonight against Utah in this what it looks to be a higher-paced game. Domantas Sabonis at 8.3, 43 in his last game against OKC, 30-plus minutes in his last 6. He's averaging 42.1 fantasy points on the road. They don't really have anybody that can match up. Danilo's good, and he's actually the next person on my list is Danilo Gallinari at 6.8. He's averaging 31.3 fantasy points at home. He has put up 36, 38, and 45 in his last 3 of 4. So he only put up 21.1 fantasy points in this matchup against Indiana in Indiana earlier this season. He gets them at home tonight, so I kind of like him. I don't think anybody's going to go there. He's really contrarian. Nobody's going to play him. And if he can put up 35 fantasy points, I think I'm totally fine with some Gallinari. Jaren Jackson Jr. at 6.8. Chicago allowing the 5th most fantasy points over the last 5 to the power forward spot. 45 last game in 34 minutes. If, of course, Jonas Valanciunas sits, Kyle Anderson sits, they're going to need him once again. They're going to have nobody, down low. Jaren Jackson Jr. has been playing 30-plus minutes in most of his games. I'm totally fine with Jaren Jackson. His price is finally up there where it should be. Jaren Jackson Jr. at like 4.9 was a lot of fun, but now he's 6.8. So Blake Griffin at 6.6 only played 24 minutes last night, put up 33 fantasy points against Cleveland. Gets a nice pace-up spot here against Milwaukee, who's allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the power forward spot over the last 5. He's only 6.6K. I would probably expect him to play 28 or so more minutes tonight if he does not sit. If he does play on this back-to-back, which he has sat in prior back-to-back, so it's definitely something to monitor. I'm just saying if he does play. something you want to look at. Blake Griffin at 6.6, really cheap. Carmelo Anthony at 6.2. Had a bad game last game, played the Clippers. Everybody has a bad game against the Clippers. Price went down a little bit. He's 6.2. Sacramento at home. He's put up 26 and 47 in his last two at Portland. So Carmelo at 6.2. I'm totally fine with. Moving along, Belicia at 6.1. On the flip side, we know Carmelo doesn't play a lot of defense. Portland allowing the seventh most fantasy points to that power forward spot over the last 5. He's put up 34 and 37 fantasy points in his last 2. Gets a nice pace-up spot here in Portland. And he's played 25 more minutes in his last 8 games. So, Belicia at 6.1. Totally fine with. The guy's been playing really well. Lauri Markkanen has come alive over his last 2 games. I think it's a nice buy-low spot here against Memphis. Memphis allowing the 9th most fantasy points over the last 5 to that power forward spot. He's played 30 and 32 minutes in his last 2 games. Put up 28 and 31.3 fantasy points in those last 2. Markkanen is building some confidence. It's the time to buy in right now. You got to buy in at 5.6 against the Grizzlies here in a nice pace-up spot. Totally fine. Totally like it. It's a nice spot for Markkanen here tonight at home. Kelly Olynyk at 4.2. Get a nice revenge spot here. He returns to Boston. He played for Boston for a while. Played 35 minutes last night. This is a back-to-back for the Heat, but he played 35 minutes, put up 32 fantasy points, and we know that that Boston struggles a little bit against bigs. So Kelly Olynyk in a nice little back revenge spot. I couldn't find the word. Nice little revenge spot. So at 4.2, I think he's a fine tournament play. Dario Saric is one that I missed. Looks like Aaron Baines will sit once again. Saric has been killing it without Baines. He's been getting lots of rebounds. He's been seeing his overall production go up. So Dario Saric, I think, is in play once again. I forgot to mention him earlier on. Moving over to the center spot, Karl Anthony Towns at 10.6 in a nice pace-up spot here. He's put up 52, 61, 64 in his last 3 on the road. Totally fine with him against Dallas. Drummond, of course, will likely 99% probably play in this game on a back-to-back against Milwaukee. He's 8.9. He played 31 minutes last night and put up 58.5 fantasy points against Cleveland. We know Milwaukee has struggled against the center spot. They could be without Brook Lopez once again, so they'll probably play Robin. If he's out again and Drummond plays, I would expect Drummond to play all game. It's not really a big spread for Milwaukee here. It's back at home. It's still at home for Detroit. So, yeah, give me all the Drummond at 8.9. I'm totally fine with that. Some people might be scared away because of the back-to-back because they're playing Milwaukee, but I love the spot. Hassan Whiteside had his price go down to 7.6, put up 35.5 last night. Or in his last game, sorry. Sacramento allowing the 9th most fantasy points to that center spot, and Rashawn Holmes is gonna struggle against him. Whiteside's a big dude, so 44 and 51 fantasy points in his last 2 at home. Totally fine with Hassan Whiteside. Rudy Gobert 7.5 against the Lakers, who are allowing the 10th most fantasy points over the last 5 to that center spot. Fresh off of a 52-point fantasy effort against Philadelphia. He owned Embiid. Embiid was not very good. You get Rudy here at 7.5K at home against the Lakers. I'm a fan. Steven Adams at 6'3", 34 or more in his last 4 or 5, back-to-back 40 fantasy point games in his last 2 games. We get an exploitable Indiana front court here for Adams at home. Totally fine with Steven Adams at 6'3". I think nobody will go there. Frank Kaminsky again at 5.5. He's probably going to start. Played 33 minutes last game in that spot start for Baines. 29 fantasy points. So Kaminsky again will be in play here against against Orlando. So I'm totally fine with Frank Kaminsky. DeAndre Jordan at 5K. He's played 23 and 24 minutes in his last 2. Put up 26.8 and 29.5 fantasy points in those 2. Gets an Atlanta team tonight that's not exactly great against the center spot, and he's a bigger dude. So DeAndre Jordan at 5K, I think I'm totally fine with as well. That is going to do it. It's been 28 and a half minutes on this edition, your December 4th, Wednesday edition of the Quick Bricks NBA DFS podcast. Hopefully we will chat once again. I know this is just a little bit of a preview. A lot of news we'll be watching and monitoring over the day, course of the day as it goes on. 10 gamer. It's going to be a fun one, guys. Let's talk later.